The committee will now have under consideration RS 20192C2. Who's going to lead off? Representative Barbieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The federal health care laws recently passed by the U.S. Congress have invaded the traditional sovereign powers of the states. This bill, in the first instance, declares that this intrusion by the federal government is beyond a reasonable application of the General Welfare Clause and the Commerce Clause of the Constitution of the United States, and therefore is null and void. It further definitely sets out certain prohibitions to assure that the federal government cannot circumvent the legislature's intent in exercising Idaho's sovereign right to interpose between its citizens and an increasingly onerous and intrusive federal bureaucracy. The prohibitions are: no state agency may act to implement these federal laws. No state agency may execute agreements with the federal government in furtherance of these laws. No state employee or agency may assist in the execution of these laws. No state agency may take or spend money in furtherance of these laws. No one can be compelled to comply with these federal laws. The bill, again, in protecting its citizens from onerous federal power, prohibits execution against property rights of our citizens for failure to comply with these federal laws. The bill allows the Attorney General to provide legal protection to aggrieved residents through or from the source of the Constitutional Defense Council Fund. The bill allows for civil action by an aggrieved person from anyone violating this bill's provisions. That's the nut of the legislation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll prepare to answer questions.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Higgins.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and Representative, have you read the Attorney General's opinion, the State Attorney General's opinion on this?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Higgins, yes, I have.
Thank you. Are you also aware that no court in the history of the United States has ever upheld a state effort to nullify a federal law?
No federal court, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Barbieri.
Representative Higgins, I do believe no federal court has done that. The difficulty is that the federal courts are an arm of the federal government, so it would be very difficult to imagine an arm of the federal government ruling against itself.
Okay, thank you. And I do have a follow-up
Higgins.
question. It says here on the fiscal note that it would cost approximately $228,000 or $228 million. Is that correct?
Cost? It's my understanding. I'm sorry,
Representative Barbieri.
Mr. Chairman.
You'll get this down
Higgins,
eventually.
I will get. I'm just practice. It is my understanding that it will save initially that amount. There's no estimates by any of the agencies as to the exact amount these two laws are going to cost the state.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I do have one more
Representative
follow-up,
Higgins.
if I may. Thank you. And how much is it going to cost the state to hire attorneys to defend this?
Representative Barbieri.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Higgins, there's no estimate as to that as well. We are already involved in litigation from last year's Freedom Act, and this is just an extension of that, just taking it a step further as we work our way through, as I say, beginning to protect the citizens of the Idaho, this wildly unpopular federal law.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barbieri, I used to work in healthcare, and so I'm really concerned about the 250,000 uninsured in Idaho. If this bill passes, do you have a plan to cover those uninsured and the underinsured and the people going into bankruptcy?
Mr. Chairman, Representative King, America has the best health care system in the world, bar none. There may be a necessity of continuing to make it better. There are plans in place and there are policies in place that are handling those uninsured now. Right now we're talking about individual mandates requiring participation and penalties for those individual mandates if people do not participate. We're talking about increased taxes that are so numerous we can't even imagine. We're talking about increased numbers of bureaucrats and bureaucracies to enforce these two laws that'll be, as I said, is inestimable in terms of the costs. That's what we're focusing on here in attempting to opt out of this particular law.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Representative King.
So we've already received $2 million. The Department of Insurance has already received $2 million to start on our, this is the law of the land. So are we going to give it back? Are those folks who are working on this, are they going to be fired? What's your plan for that?
It's not, I'm sorry, Mr.
Barbieri.
Chairman, Representative King, I have no information with respect to new hires having been brought on to begin the implementation of the exchanges with the Insurance Commission. The meeting we had with the Insurance Commission, it was very difficult for them to have any idea of what it was going to cost as they move through these exchanges. So again, it's inestimable, and that's the difficulty.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you. Representative, my question pertains to the statehood of Idaho. When Idaho was admitted in 1890, the right of nullification, the right of secession, and the compact theory had all been rejected by the United States when Idaho became a state. So the state of Idaho is an inseparable part of the American Union, and the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. So is this correct with this nullification bill? You want to go against the Constitution of the United States?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Barbieri.
Representative Smith, what this bill is targeted is to go against interpretations of the Constitution. It's understood that with respect to many areas, the federal jurisdiction is going to supersede that of state law. The question becomes, is the legislature going to become a rubber stamp of everything that the federal government decides to do, or is the legislature going to be able to stand and interpose between onerous laws that the federal government decides on its own to implement and its citizens? And that's the question before us. All we need, in my mind, Representative Smith, is that we begin this discussion. That's all we're asking for today, is that this discussion begin. If we decide that it is settled law that the federal government can do anything that it wants against state priorities, state responsibilities, then we might as well just get rubber stamps and rubber stamp every single thing the federal government does. And this law, this bill, is attempting to stand and interpose between the citizens and this particular law.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Buckner-Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Barbieri. The bottom line is that we have a system of government that has three branches, and the courts have the authority to determine the constitutionality. While I understand your vigor and your enthusiasm at checking and having this discussion, as you talked about, and doing some investigation, there are a number of states that are involved in this, in a lawsuit similar to ours. Given the economic situation in our state right now and the vulnerable people across the state that are in dire straits, and that we're going to have to make some tough decisions from a Medicaid standpoint, from health and welfare standpoint, education standpoint, why not let this play out and still take a position at a later date?
Mr. Chairman,
Barbieri.
Representative Buckner-Webb, the difficulties that we have with Medicaid are not affected here with respect to this. This discussion that we're asking to be held here in the legislature is specifically targeted toward whether or not the legislature has the authority to stand against what many of my constituents are saying is an onerous law. We've already had hundreds of companies opting out and allowed to be opted out of these provisions. What of those companies that are not able to opt out? That's where the expense comes. That's where the effect on employees comes, is those companies that are not able to opt out of these onerous provisions.
Follow-up?
Representative Buckner-Webb.
Last comment. I would say that I hear what you're saying. I hear you loud and clear. And I ask you about those vulnerable populations that do not have companies that they're affiliated with that are able to opt out and will still be deeply impacted by the health care decisions we make here in the legislature.
Mr. Chairman.
Barbieri.
Representative Buckner-Webb, I hear you. We are dealing with those people now. We have policies and procedures in place that are dealing with the poverty-stricken in their medical and health care. The question becomes, are we going to continue to allow the federal government to mandate that, or are we going to be responsible enough as a legislature to handle it ourselves?
Thank you.